You're watching WBTR TV, Channel 19. Better television for Baton Rouge.
WBTR, make your day a wonderful day. Say it again. Channel 19. WBTR, make your night a
The muddy waters of the mighty Mississippi replacing Louisiana's crude in terms of bringing revenue into the state coffers. The previous session that just ended would indicate so with the proliferation of gambling across the state. It's all in a hopes that it will bring more revenue into state coffers.
Many have tried to play down the amount of time the legislature spent on the gambling issue this year, saying it really wasn't a big deal. But the number of bills filed dealing with gambling indicates different. There were dozens of bills introduced, many attempting to expand gambling in the state, while some sought to cool down the gambling fever. With the millions of dollars the state has realized from the lottery and video poker, there seems to be big hopes for even more money from casino-type gambling among some state officials. The state has yet to take in the first dollar from a riverboat or from the New Orleans casino, but just the estimated revenues has many asking for more.
I come to address you for the purpose to tell you that the Riverboat Gaming Commission unanimously passed a resolution to ask the legislature to increase the number of boats that would be permissible. I think I told you all a week ago, but in the event that I didn't, we now have 44 applications. Basically, all of those are good applications. They will generate a tremendous amount of income for the state, as we talked about. If we do 15 boats, which we can do now, that will give us about $124 million in income to the state. If we do 25, that would come up somewhere in the neighborhood of about $200 million to the state. So I urge you to increase the number of boats, is what I appear here for this morning. I would be happy to answer any questions if anybody had any.
I have Mr. Tennyson.
Yes, sir.
Pickering.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. We've heard so much about the proliferation of gambling in this particular state. Last Thursday, when we were here, the charitable bingo people came over, and one of my colleagues said, "When is it going to end? When is it going to end?"
Yes, sir.
And now, all of a sudden, just 1 week later, we come back. We want to increase 10 additional boats. We want to go to full-side dock gambling in several of the cases. We want an opt-out plan instead of the old opt-in plan. There's an editorial in the paper this morning in The Advocate, and I don't know if you read it or not, which discussed the proliferation in gambling and the addition of gambling institutions or gambling casinos to the point where they would be readily available in all areas and within 200 miles of every place. Now I think they'll be, within 50 miles of every area within the state. And the editorial went on, and I thought it made a lot of sense. It indicated that if we continue this, that we'll not be taking money from outside, but taking it from within, from the people within. And when you begin that, that's the downfall. That's the beginning of the downfall. Would you agree that if you start taking money from the local people, that you're going to actually destroy gambling, which we were trying to do as something that would help the state as far as its taxes? Don't you think that this is going to reverse it? And being a proponent of gambling, and I voted for it, I'm very, very concerned that what we're going to do by expanding gambling to this extent is actually destroy it.
I am of the opinion, from what I know from the industry, that we have barely scratched the surface. That you are correct, and I did not read the editorial in the Monroe paper. However, let me suggest to you that we will only be the 4th state in the entire nation with any significant gambling, behind Las Vegas, Atlanta, Atlantic City, now Mississippi.
The Riverboat Gaming Commission tried their luck in raising the limit on the number of boats from 15 to 25 during this session. However, they were unable to convince enough legislators to support the move. When many communities became aware that riverboats were coming to their neighborhoods and they had no voice in the matter, many let their legislators know they weren't pleased. And as a result, several pieces of legislation were introduced during this session that attempted to give the citizens the ability to vote on whether gambling would be allowed in their communities or not. The problem, the bills never made it out of the committees to which they were assigned.
I'm disappointed. I think the people of this state and the local governing authorities should have some influence on what's happening with the proliferation of gambling. You know, Tony, we're looking at a major cultural change in Louisiana with the gambling proliferation the way it's going on right now. And when the history books of this state get written 50 years from now, the grandchildren of folks sitting in this legislative body are going to be looking for their names in those books, and they're going to be looking for where they stood, what they stood for, and what they did. And I'm afraid there are a lot of them that are going to be very disappointed.
Does it appear that the gambling has taken an acceleration rather than a check and balance that a lot of people intended to do in this session?
Oh, it's absolutely exploded. It's what a lot of people were concerned about when the gambling first opened up with the lottery. That it becomes such almost a drug for the state, that the need for the revenues become the result and the whole goal rather than any consideration of what it does for economic development or anything of that nature. Remember, all the initial arguments were in terms of economic development, jobs, that sort of thing. You don't even hear that anymore. All of the discussion from the Riverboat Gaming Commission at this point is we've got to get these boats licensed as quickly as possible to try to solve the state's revenue problem. There is no thought going on to what it does to local communities, and that's terrible.
The addiction that the state had to oil revenues 10 years ago, is gambling going to, are they trying to make gambling the replacement for that?
Well, at least oil revenues were a legitimate source of income. Gambling revenues, yeah, I guess so. I mean, it's people, some of the people that are backing much of this proliferation of gambling are saying it's a voluntary tax, and that's the argument that they make. Unfortunately, what's happening is it's cannibalizing the pockets of the very poorest people in the state of Louisiana. With all of the gaming that's going on all around the country, we're not going to be bringing in vast numbers of additional people to Louisiana. We're just going to be taking dollars out of the paychecks and putting them into government. And that's an insidious process, and it's a terrible way to try to finance government.
Isn't it somewhat of a double standard that the same legislators that voted to impose this upon the cities complain about the federal government's impositions on state government that affect them?
Sure. Well, there's no consistency in this body a lot of times, unfortunately, and this committee, the Criminal Justice Committee, has been deliberately set up from the beginning of this administration as a device to encourage gambling in Louisiana in all its forms. I think that's been very clear. I have had members of the committee tell me that that is the reason that they serve on that committee. So it's disappointing, but I'm afraid the system right now is wired to try to keep any sort of reforms in the gambling area from even getting out of committee.
You know, what I'm concerned about is really the crime and the corruption. As I said in committee, these various entities right now are starting to step on each other's toes. You know, yesterday the proponents of the casino in New Orleans said, quote, if you expand gambling in any other forms, you're going to impact my business. And then the riverboat says, well, you know, with casinos coming in, with the land base, that's going to hurt us. Then even the quote-unquote charitable bingo people were here today, and they're hollering foul ball. They're saying, hey, that this river, that the gambling measures right now on the coast have affected them in St. Bernard's Parish. They're closing down overnight. So what do I think will happen in the future? I just think that we're going to have so much gambling that it's just that this state is going to be in complete disarray when it comes to gambling issues, and I just think that you're going to see corruption and crime like you've never seen before in the state of Louisiana due to all this gambling.
You think the voters are going to remember this come election time next year for those legislators that have supported this and pushed it without the people having a voice in it? You think they're going to remember that?
Oh, I most definitely think so. I think that the people, you know, should have that voice in deciding what they want in their local community. And, you know, as I said before, this is a moral issue. And this moral issue is this simple. That, you know, it's morally wrong, and some people look at it like that. You have a lot of people that will go in that booth and you know, they're going to speak out when they pull that lever and let people know, hey, I don't want this in my community. And I just think that we're, as I said, we're sending the wrong signal, and I think it's a sad state of affairs in Louisiana now that we have legalized all these gambling issues.
One representative, Randy Roach, a Democrat from Lake Charles, refused to give up after having several of his referendum bills shot down by the House Criminal Justice Committee. Senate Bill 1023 expanded gambling to allow for dockside gambling along Red River. However, Representative Roach was able to convince his House colleagues to attach an amendment that would give voters in Calcasieu Parish a voice in riverboat gambling.
I was elected to represent my district as you were elected to represent your district. And I have been trying and trying and trying and trying to get this issue passed out of this House and into the Senate so that the people of our area can have a right that was deprived of them last year. And were there any other way, I would choose not to do this and amend to try to mess up somebody else's bill. But let me just try to put the issue of local option in perspective. We are the only state in the country that deprives the local citizens of an opportunity in one way or another to determine whether or not they will have casino gambling in their community. And I use casino gambling because whether it's on a boat or whether it's on land, it's the same thing. We have had riverboat gambling now for almost 2 years, at least on the books. The commission was appointed just a few months ago, and they have been very busy over the past few months, and already you see efforts that are being made to redefine, to expand, and to change the rules somewhat, even though we say the people back home had a chance to consider that issue, but that chance has long since lapsed. This bill is about dockside. It's about riverboats. And I don't think it's going to stop here. And whatever happens in the future, I want to make sure that the people in my district have the opportunity to do what they feel is best as far as the future of their community. The option that we include at the end of 3 years in response to the point raised by Mr. Bruno needs to be understood. It's not automatic.
The public ought to be informed about the money being made and how it's being spent. You know, we tried to dedicate the lottery proceeds to law and order and education. The legislature turned us down by 1 vote of the 2/3 vote of doing that. They need to review these kinds of things. Sunlight, care, be careful. There's a potential for corruption. There is in every kind of business that has big money. Insurance, health care, hospital certificates of need. Does that ring a bell with you? Yeah. Look, there's no guarantees. Life's like that. Bad people can take good operations and corrupt them. Our test will be the kind of women and men we put in charge. They can do it. Even gambling, if moderated and limited, they can hold it corrupt-free, but there'll be a lot of dangers.
In your opinion, do you think Louisiana is relying too much on gambling to solve its financial problems?
Yes, I do, and I also believe that we're sending the wrong message to our youth here in Baton Rouge.
Definitely.
I also agree.
Any further comments?
Yes, I thought a greater portion of this was going to go toward education, and it isn't, and they're passing a bill for $140 million to go to sports when education is much more important.
Well, primarily speaking, when you look at the revenues coming from gambling, you have to ask yourself, where is the money coming from? You have to look at pension plans, you have to look at pay scales, payouts. You know, when you look in terms of finances, I really think we need to find alternative spending. You know, because we're looking at the cuts that we're looking at in taxes. So I feel basically, if we look at the overall picture, we need to try to find other ways to create funding for the state.